Okay, I'm going to talk about the adrenal glands for the students who were absent last lesson. So this is a kidney, this is the adrenal gland which is located at the top of the kidneys. As we learned from our previous lessons, adrenal cortex, for example, adrenal gland is consist of the two parts. The first is adrenal cortex, the second is adrenal medulla, right? This is the medulla, this is the cortex of the adrenal gland. Cortex is also consists of the three parts. The outer layer is called zona glomerulosa. The middle part is called zona fasciculata, and the inner part is called zona reticularis. All right. So what synthesize in each part, amount of substances is synthesized. For example, from the zona glomerulosa, the aldosterone is synthesized. All right. Aldosterone is synthesized from zona glomerulosa. And for example, the cortisol, our stress hormone, is synthesized from zona fasciculata. From zona fasciculata. So from the inner part, zona reticularis synthesizes, for example, estrogens and the testosterone. Estrogen, the female hormone, and testosterone. All right. So in the medulla synthesizes, for example, you have to know catecholamines. You know what catecholamines? Catecholamines are epinephrine and norepinephrine. They synthesize it from the center of the adrenal cortex, center of the adrenal gland, which is medulla. Epinephrine and norepinephrine synthesized. So epinephrine means adrenaline, norepinephrine, noradrenaline. All right. Then you don't have to know about the somatostatins and the substance piece right now. You have to know that the adrenal glands are located at the top of the kidneys. Adrenal medulla is a sympathetic neurotransmitter release. So they release the sympathetic neurotransmitters like epinephrine and norepinephrine. And the adrenal cortex is synthesizes glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, and sex steroids. So mineralocorticoids are synthesized from the zona glomerulosa. Glomerulosa synthesizes mineralocorticoids. For example, your aldosterone is synthesized from your cortex, the outermost layer zona from zona glomerulosa. Their function, sodium retention from the urine to the body, increases the blood volume and the pressure. We have learned about it already. And the central part, zona fasciculata, synthesizes glucocorticoids. The main glucocorticoid is cortisol. It has an anti-inflammatory agent, and also the function of the cortisol is to produce glucose from the fats and the proteins. From the fats and for the proteins, for example, you have the adipose tissues, and you have the muscles. All right, this is a muscle. From the muscles, they synthesize what? From the muscles, this is a muscle of Hassan. We have learned about it. This is a muscle of the islet. For example, here I have the muscle. Imagine this is a muscle. And this muscle contains proteins, and this contains the fat, for example, adipose tissue. They make glucose when you're hungry from the fats and the proteins. And this process is called gluconeogenesis. So gluconeogenesis, what's the meaning of the gluconeogenesis? Gluco means glucose, neogenes, new, and genesis means produce. So it means production of new glucose. All right, gluconeogenesis means production of the new glucose. It's a function of cortisol. So the sex steroids, the sex hormones, for example, testosterone or estrogen, is synthesized from your zona reticularis layer, which are androgens. All right. The pancreas. We have learned a lot about the pancreas. For example, pancreas has, for example, the outer layers, which are called acini of the pancreas, and we have the islets of the Langerhans. This is the islet of the Langerhans, which consists of the alpha cells and the beta cells. Alpha cells produce, for example, glucagon, and beta cells produce what? Insulin. So they have their functions. Islets of the Langerhans. This is islets of the Langerhans. So the function of the pancreas is to produce mostly insulin and glucagon. This is a pancreas tail, for example, head, body, and the tail. For example, this is the pancreatic ducts. Here you can see the pancreatic ducts. The acini cells produce, for example, trypsin, lipase, and amylase. They go to the pancreatic ducts and they release the contents of which are trypsin, lipase, amylase into the duodenum. All right. So we have learned about the common bile ducts in our digestive system. So after that, islets of the Langerhans. So insulin, when it's secreted when it's secreted while you have the high glucose levels in the body after the meal. They make this glucose into the glycogen. For example, they accumulate this amount of the glycogen in the liver, and in the muscles. So the function of the insulin is to go down the level of the glucose, so decrease the level of the glucose in your body. Glucagon is vice versa, increase the glucose levels. We have learned about the terminology called gluconeogenesis. Now I'm going to teach you glycogenolysis. Glucagon does a process which is called glycogenolysis. So glycogen means glycogen, which are accumulated in your liver and in your muscles, all right? Glycogenolysis means, you have stored amount of the glycogen, you have to go into lyse it, you have to go into break down all of them. This process is called not glycogeneogenesis, but it's called glycogenolysis. In the class I have explained you about it. For example, when you're hungry, two mechanisms work. For example, firstly, your adrenal cortex works. Secondly, your pancreas works. Imagine this is a pancreas, all right? In the pancreas, your alpha cells work. Alpha cells produce glucagon. This glucagon then goes where? This glucagon goes to the muscles, and also where? And also they go to your, where? To your liver, all right? Then they go to the liver. Imagine this is liver. From the liver and the muscles, they break down the glycogen, they make the glucose, and this process is called glycogenolysis. So breaking down of the glycogen is called glycogenolysis process. Glycogenolysis. The second mechanism of generating the glucose when you're hungry is this hormone, for example, cortisol, which is secreting from your adrenal cortex, all right, zona fasciculata. It goes, for example, from the zona fasciculata layer, from the central layer of the adrenal gland, glucocorticoids, which is cortisol synthesized. This cortisol then goes where? This cortisol then goes to the muscles. This cortisol then goes to the muscles and adipose tissue. From there, from the adipose tissue, we have the fat, and in the muscles we have proteins. They make the new glucose out from the proteins and the fats, not glycogen. And this process is called gluconeogenesis, glucose new generation. All right? This was the function of your pancreas. So both the cortisol and the glucagon, So release glucose to the blood. Both cortisol and the glucagon release the glucose into the body. So cortisol release from the fats and the proteins, and this process is called gluconeogenesis. And the glucagon, for example, stimulates the breakdown of the glycogen into free glucose. This process is called glycogenolysis. Gonads, male and female primary sex organs. We know that the gonads are male and female sex organs, all right? Both of them. So they also these gonads produce sex hormones, all right, which are called steroids also. And they produce the gametes. Gametes are sex cells, for example, ovum and the sperm. Testes produce androgens and the testosterone. All right, testes produce androgens and the testosterone. They develop male secondary sex characteristics. What are the male secondary sex characteristics? If someone asks you, have to answer like the broad shoulder. The broad shoulder is a male sex characteristic, and the facial hair and the axillary hair and the production of the sperm is the secondary sex characteristics of the males. And the ovum, estrogens and the progesterone, estradiol form the estrogen. For example, estrogen, progesterone is, and estrogen, progesterone is your also hormone which is produced from your gonads. Female sex characteristics, also these hormones take part in the secondary sex characteristics. For example, what are the secondary sex characteristics of the female? Narrow waist and the wider hips, breasts, mammary glands, and the softer skin, so on. Also regulate menstruation cycle. We have learned about it a lot of time. For example, the progesterone takes part in the growth of the uterine lining in the second half of the cycle. In the second half, corpus luteum synthesizes a lot of progesterone, which take part in the synthesis of new endometrial lining. All right? Thank you.